Welcome to another edition of Who's Number One. I'm Trey Wingo. Kids, today's topic is larceny. We're not talking stolen bases or the Winona Ryder variety. We're talking about one-sided transactions that make you ask, do you think these guys bought Enron stock at an all-time high? We're not counting cash transactions, which explains why the Babe to the Yankees, not on this list. But for every trader who went momentarily brain dead, there is a tradee toasting his outstanding insight. Here then, ESPN Classic's ranking of the 20 greatest trade robberies of all time.
2020.
To the backhand, tapped it on target, and Hasek makes the save and covers the puck.
Hasek kind of gave a hint of what was to come when he was a member of the Blackhawks in the 1992 final, playing for Chicago against Pittsburgh.
Ariel Lemieux sets up Larry Murphy, lets it go, blocked by Hasek.
2020.
In the summer of 1992, the Blackhawks traded little-known backup goalie Dominik Hasek to the Sabres for Stefan Beauregard and fourth-round pick Eric Daze. Beauregard never played for Chicago, and Daze was played by injury through 11 pedestrian seasons.
The Blackhawk franchise over the years really has been a little bit cursed and really not a contender for a long time now.
Hasek, meanwhile, filled his portfolio. 6 Vezina trophies, 2 MVP awards, a Stanley Cup title with Detroit, and an Olympic gold medal with the Czechs.
This wasn't entirely Chicago's fault, okay? I know it looks bad now, but people forget at the time Chicago had a goaltender by the name of Ed Belfour, the Eagle, and Dominik Hasek was the backup for Eddie Belfour. Well, the expansion draft was coming, and the expansion draft rules said you had to leave a goaltender unprotected, and they weren't going to be able to protect Dominik Hasek. So instead of losing him for nothing, they made the trade to Buffalo, and of course, Hasek went on to be one of the great goaltenders of all time.
That's a trade that, if you could certainly foresee what the payoff is going to be down the line, you certainly don't make it.
1990.
The deal is Larry Boa for Ivan DeJesus. Not too bad.
A bouncing ball headed for right field.
Ryan Sandberg was a throw-in.
So there it is, the 2000th hit of his career.
19.
In 1982, the Phillies and Cubs swapped shortstops. Ivan DeJesus to Philadelphia, Larry Boa to Chicago. As a throw-in, the Phillies sent along Ryan Sandberg, whose entire Major League career to that point consisted of 13 games. Boa and DeJesus played without distinction for their new teams. Sandberg played his way into the Hall of Fame.
Ryan Sandberg in the Phillies farm system was considered a decent prospect. The Phillies needed a shortstop in Ivan DeJesus, and it seemed like a good move at the time, like a lot of these kind of trades do when you trade a prospect for a veteran guy, but sometimes it doesn't work out that way.
Fans are saying, the media saying, well, who's this Sandberg guy in this trade? Nobody knew who I was, except for Dallas Green, who just came from the Phillies organization as manager, and now he was the new GM of the Cubs.
In 15 star-spangled seasons with the Cubbies, Sandberg was a 10-time All-Star, amassing more than 1,000 RBI and nearly 2,400 hits and winning 9 Gold Gloves.
Best offensive second baseman that I've seen, I've played against.
As it turns out, sure, a terrible trade, but at the time, I don't think people were saying that.
This is an example of why teams don't want to part with even lesser-known prospects. You make a move like this, and you never know when it's going to look awful.
18.
I heard it on the radio, and the next thing I know, a phone call, and I said, how am I going to afford to play in Boston? Boston's last place.
Esposito about to score! Number 500!
18.
In 1967, Boston traded Pitt Martin, Jack Norris, and Gilles Marat to Chicago for Fred Stanfield, Ken Hodge, and a player known as Espo, who specialized in taking root in front of the net. Phil Esposito teamed up with Bobby Orr to form a dynamic duo on skates.
Who
knew that that deal was going to turn out the way it did. Nobody knew that.
That was one of the great trades that rounded out the team for Bobby Orr.
Here comes Orr. Circles behind a shot. Goal! Phil Esposito scoring his 27th goal of the year.
While playing with Orr, Esposito won 2 Stanley Cup rings and twice was the league's MVP. When he retired in 1981, the center ranked 2nd in NHL history in points and goals.
It was one of those scenarios that just fit. Everything just kind of came together.
A brilliant move by Phil Esposito.
When you get 2 guys like that, it's just virtually impossible to stop them for a full game.
Orr left him with an empty net.
What the trade really did was make Boston. It made Boston a hell of a team.
17.
Sometimes you take a calculated risk. Sometimes you just make a mistake.
Struck him out. Pedro Martinez is perfect through 9 innings.
17.
In November of 1993, the Dodgers, concerned that Pedro Martinez was on the frail side, traded the young right-hander to Montreal for second baseman Delino DeShields. In 3 seasons with L.A., DeShields hit .241. Martinez, meanwhile, began to compile a Hall of Fame candidacy.
The Dodgers weren't convinced that he could stand up to the rigors of a lot of innings at the major league level.
Ooh, good fastball there.
Too small, too skinny. He won last. He can't pitch 5 innings as a starter. It took me 7 years to miss a start.
Under the tutelage of Felipe Alou, Pedro really blossomed into the pitcher that he could have become for the Dodgers.
With the Expos, Martinez won his first Cy Young Award. After being traded to Boston, he won 2 more. Then he helped turn the Mets into contenders. For the 3 teams in his post-LA career, he's pitched more than 2,500 innings and fashioned an ERA under 3.
It wasn't as if we wanted to trade Pedro. The question was, how do we fill a need? And we felt that we were acquiring one of the top young second basemen. Unfortunately, from the standpoint of the Dodgers, it didn't work out that way.
16.
Bagwell didn't look like he was going to be a great prospect. He hadn't hit with much power in the minor leagues. And Larry Anderson was a very good relief pitcher at that point. Boston needed him for the pennant drive that year, and it didn't seem like they'd given up that high of a price to get him. As it turned out, it was one of the worst trades in baseball history.
16.
With a month remaining in the 1990 season, Boston, wanting a bullpen shore-up as it contended for the AL East title, picked up aging reliever Larry Anderson from Houston. In return, the Astros got a third base prospect named Jeff Bagwell, who was languishing behind the hitting machine that was Wade Boggs.
The Red Sox never thought in terms of anything beyond Baggs playing third base. Well, how's he going to play third base? Boggs is at third base. So he's excess baggage.
While Anderson wasn't re-signed by Boston after the 1990 season, Bagwell switched to first base in '91 by Houston and was the Rookie of the Year. 3 years later, he was MVP. 9 times he hit more than 30 homers and scored more than 100 runs, and 8 times he knocked in at least 100 runs in becoming the anchor of the Astros.
Bagwell was not a guy in the very low minors. Bagwell was a guy they knew was going to be a fine ball player.
When you're trying to get to where you want to go right now, sometimes these deals are made. And when they do come back and bite you, boy, you know, people aren't going to forget.
15.
The trade of Fergie Jenkins by the Phillies to the Cubs was all about youth for age.
They call myself, Adolfo Phillips, and John Hernstein in, and they say there's a 5-player deal with the Cubs. We'd like you to report to the Cubs in 24 hours.
There's a good fastball, strike call.
15.
Fergie Jenkins had pitched only 14 innings for the Phillies when he went out to the Cubs in a deal for pitchers Larry Jackson and Bob Buell in April of 1966. Jackson and Buell won 47 games combined before retiring. Jenkins won 147 in his first 8 seasons with the Cubs, 6 times being a 20-game winner.
When I got traded to the Cubs, I had the opportunity to pitch a lot, and I ended up making a pretty good career out of an opportunity, and so I took full advantage of it.
I think that that was a big mistake, no question about it.
Jenkins pitched himself into the Hall of Fame. He finished with 284 wins and became the 7th pitcher to compile at least 3,000 strikeouts.
Hey, struck him out.
Unfortunately, trades are something that you can't foresee, or you can't foresee the potential of young blood. You make your own luck a lot of times.
14.
Worst trade in history was Ernie Broglio for Lou Brock.
There he goes.
Permit me to read to you the comments of the brain trust of the Chicago Cubs when they dealt Lou Brock. I believe this deal puts us in a much better position to make a run for the flag. I think this is going to make us more respected.
In June of 1964, the Cubs traded Lou Brock, who was in his 3rd season as their left fielder, to the Cards with 2 others for pitcher Ernie Broglio and 2 others. Over the next 103 games, Brock hit .348 with 33 steals. It was a taste of the brilliance that would take him to the Hall of Fame.
When I got the call for the trade, I was shocked that the word trade came up. I was probably the 5th outfielder on the team. Ernie Broglio, outstanding Major League pitcher, actually won about 60 games in the last 3 years.
Overall, I thought it was a good trade. We needed pitching, we were scoring runs, and Broglio, coming off the season that he had, I think it was good.
In his career, Brock banged out over 3,000 hits, stole over 900 bases, including 118 in 1974, and helped the Cardinals win 2 World Series. Broglio? Well, he developed arm problems and went 7-19 in 2+ seasons with the Cubs before being released.
If you look at the Cardinals' history, they always have a spirited ball club. It's one that didn't defeat itself. You had to beat it. You had a guy in the leadoff slot who could do those things and raise the level of excitement. So the next 17 years, that's what I did.
I was in my hotel room the night before a game in Houston, and they showed 2 or 3 highlights, and then they said, here is the phenomenon from Mississippi Valley State, Jerry Rice.
Totten to throw, fly pattern, Jerry Rice, touchdown.
I said, this is the greatest young player I have seen.
13.
Jerry Rice's collegiate numbers looked too good to be true, and the competition level at Mississippi Valley State scared away many pro talent assessors, but not Bill Walsh. During the 1985 draft, the San Francisco coach had his team trade its 1st-round pick, number 28 overall, and a 2nd-round choice, and swap 3rd-rounders to move up to number 16. And with that pick, the 49ers stole away the most prolific receiver in NFL history.
Talk about one of the greatest heists of all time with the 49ers, unloading a draft pick to get Jerry Rice.
If you are a pro football scout, you had to be able to know that Jerry Rice was this extraordinary football player. Somebody blew it on that.
Jerry Rice, touchdown!
In Rice's 16 seasons with the 49ers, he went to the Pro Bowl 12 times. After finishing his career with the Raiders and Seahawks, he retired as the only player to accumulate more than 200 touchdowns and 20,000 receiving yards.
All alone, Jerry Rice, indeed, and it's Jerry Rice!
Look at his numbers in general. You gotta kind of giggle, because they're stupid. There's nobody that's going to get anywhere close to those records.
You never know how the draft is going to go. I was doubting myself just a little bit, but once I got drafted by the 49ers, it was like a dream come true.
12.
When you say lefty, and everyone in both leagues knows exactly who you're talking about when it's a pitcher, the pitcher must be pretty good.
12.
Cardinals owner Augie Bush, locked in a contract dispute with Steve Carlton, unloaded his 20-game winner before the 1972 season, shipping him to Philadelphia for right-hander Rick Wise. Lefty promptly won 27 games with a 1.97 ERA for a last-place club, earning him the first of his 4 Cy Young Awards.
At the time, both having contract disputes, I'll trade my problem for your problem, and that's what the Cardinals did, thinking that they were going to get equity in the deal, but they got anything but that.
Rick Wise turned out to be a pretty good pitcher, but Carlton was a Hall of Fame pitcher, and it definitely was a trade that went in the Philadelphia Phillies' favor.
Cardinals were competing at first or second. You know, they were really a good ball club. And when I got traded, I said, "Well, God, the Phillies, they don't win anything."
While Wise bounced around to 3 teams after a 2-year stay with the Cards, Carlton and his lethal slider wound up with 329 wins, and he was one of only 4 pitchers with 4,000 strikeouts.
Swing and a miss, a slider down and in, and he struck him out.
As a broadcaster, every time he had the ball, you had a little bit of extra jump to your step as you went to the ballpark.
He had one of the greatest work ethics I've ever seen. He's one of the strongest human beings I've ever been around. He was fabulous to work with.
I think to this day, Cardinal fans are kind of wondering, why in the world did this all come about?
11.
Even though he hit .296 with 33 homers and 113 RBI in 1965, Frank Robinson was thought to be on the decline by Cincinnati GM Bill DeWitt. That December, he sent Robinson to Baltimore for pitchers Milt Pappas and Jack Baldwin and outfielder Dick Simpson. Robinson proceeded to carry the Orioles to a sweep in the World Series.
Bill DeWitt, the owner of the Cincinnati Reds, was quoted as saying Frank Robinson was an old 30. He didn't say that. What he said is Frank Robinson is not a young 30, but Robinson was aged in good wood. He goes for Milt Pappas, and Pappas didn't have a bad time in Cincinnati. Unfortunately, he gained the designation as the principal guy traded for Frank Robinson.
Frank Robinson, the Reds were wrong about what he had left to offer, and the Orioles needed that one extra guy to put them over the top.
The Orioles, of course, their body of work speaks for itself in the late 60s and the early 70s while Frank was there. What an amazing deal by the Baltimore Orioles.
Robinson, a right-hand batter.
Long drive to left field, way back, kiss it goodbye, home run.
In his first season in Baltimore, Robinson hit .316 with 49 homers and 122 RBI. That was worth the Triple Crown, and in the process, he became the first player to be named MVP in both leagues. He would finish his Hall of Fame career with 586 home runs. A year after the disastrous trade had been made, DeWitt, who also owned the Reds, sold the team.
Lessons learned, which is always a good exercise. The great players are few and far between, and if you have an opportunity to get one, or if you have one, hang on to them.
10.
Christy Mathewson, that's one of the all-time boneheaded trades of all time. It kind of gets lost because of the time element and how many years have gone by, but this is a guy who won 373 games and one of the immortals of all time, and just shows that GMs today just don't make mistakes. They made them in the old days, too.
10.
After the 1900 season, Cincinnati sent young right-hander Christy Mathewson to the New York Giants for sore-armed Amos Ruzzi, who hadn't pitched in 2 years and would never win a game for the Reds. Mathewson? Well, he racked up 20 wins in his first year with the Giants.
Mathewson had the ability to learn a new pitch instantly. Show him how you throw it, and he would throw it. And he had such a fine gamesman's mind that the pitch would go right into his repertoire.
Baffling hitters with his killer fadeaway, Mathewson won at least 22 games for 12 straight seasons. In 1908, he won 37, which remains the National League's single-season record.
Between 1900 and 1920, he was the best pitcher in baseball. He made the Giants, the New York Giants, the first super team in baseball.
What's ironic is that Mathewson returned to the Cincinnati Reds as a player-manager in 1916 and won 1 game for the Cincinnati Reds, which was 1 more game than Amos Ruzzi ever won for them.
9.
With the 13th pick in the 1996 NBA Draft, the Charlotte Hornets select Kobe Bryant from Lower Merion High School in Pennsylvania.
9.
Conventional wisdom at the time was that the NBA was no place for a teenager who would get bounced more often than the ball. But when it came to Kobe Bryant, Jerry West, the Lakers' vice president of basketball operations, saw what others didn't.
The Hornets were in need of a center, and it seemed like the way to go was to get Vlade Divac from the Lakers for Kobe Bryant.
After I was drafted, I'm on the phone with Dave Cowens, and he's like, well, you don't have too much use for you here in Charlotte, so we're thinking of trading you, to Los Angeles. Okay, all right.
West called me right afterwards and said, Chick, I got a guy I gotta have. And I said, who was it? And he told me his name. I said, I never heard of him. He said, he's just coming out of high school. I said, you gotta be crazy.
The thing that most impressed me about him was his ability to articulate the reasons why he wanted to play in the league.
In the face of outrageous hype and severe expectations, Bryant made the transition almost immediately. His game a combination of explosiveness and elegance that drew comparisons to Michael Jordan. Bryant won 3 rings while teamed with Shaquille O'Neal. And in 2006, he led the league in scoring and in one game rang up 81 points.
I don't think there was a person when he was traded that didn't say, one day you're going to say Kobe Bryant's going to be one of the top players to ever play the game.
You give up Vlade Divac, who's a very good, serviceable center, for one of the most dangerous offensive weapons in the game. That shows the genius of Jerry West.
8.
Got him on a call, third strike.
He was kind of the car keys reliever. When Eckersley comes to the mound, people start reaching for their car keys.
As soon as he came in the game, the guys that wrote the newspapers just started doing the story right there.
In 1986, Dennis Eckersley was a floundering 6-11 starter with a 4.57 ERA for the Cubs. The following spring, he was traded with a reserve infielder to Oakland for 3 minor leaguers, none of whom ever even made it to the majors.
When they said, you're going to Oakland, I remember the last thing I said was like, I'm not done yet.
It's better to be lucky than good, and we were lucky that we got him, and so we took the benefit of it for the next 10 years.
This would go down as one of the worst trades in the history of baseball, that they got these 3 guys for an eventual Hall of Famer, and these 3 guys collectively were never able to play one day in the major leagues.
He got him, and the ball game is over.
With Oakland, Eckersley evolved into the 9th inning only closer that has since become a universal tactic. In one 5-year stretch, he averaged 44 saves a season. On his way to the Hall of Fame, he was voted the AL MVP and Cy Young in 1992.
He was so dominant because he had such great control. Almost looked like he just was looking through one eye. He closed the other eye. It looked like he was shooting a gun.
You know, for those years that he was at the top of his game as a closer, he was unhittable. If you took a lead into the 9th inning, Eckersley was going to bring it home.
Basically 2 words, explain them. Game over.
7.
Big Will Kinnigan makes the bucket.
Wilt Chamberlain played his first 3 NBA seasons in his hometown of Philadelphia before the Warriors relocated to San Francisco in 1962. In January of 1965, the league's most dominant offensive force was traded back to Philadelphia, new home of the former Syracuse Nationals. The price for the stilt? Connie Durking, Paul Newman, Lee Schaefer, and cash.
They said there was a big trade involving Wilt Chamberlain and 3 guys named Joe. And myself and Lee Schaefer and Paul Newman were the 3 guys named Joe.
What happened was he was out in San Francisco, and the team was not doing very well. They were in last place, and I think they must have decided that the best deal they could make was if they traded Wilt.
So are you happy or sad about it?
Mixed emotions. Actually, I'll be like Tony Bennett, leaving my heart here in San Francisco because I fell in love with the city.
When the trade was made to bring him back to Philadelphia from San Francisco, I mean, the media just went crazy. I mean, he was like, for a couple of weeks, it was the #1 front page story in the city.
Ladies and gentlemen,
let's welcome back Wilt Chamberlain!
Chamberlain averaged 24 points and 24 boards in leading the 76ers to a then-record 68-13 mark and the 1967 NBA title. He was traded to the Lakers a year later and helped them win the championship in 1972. Wilt's name is still splashed all over the NBA record book.
6.
People remember where they were when Kennedy was shot. People remember where they were when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon. I remember that. I also remember where I was when Nolan Ryan was traded.
No hitting for Nolan Ryan!
I personally will never forgive the Mets for trading Nolan Ryan.
6.
Nolan Ryan wanted out of New York in December of 1971. The Mets granted a wish their fans would forever regret. The hard-throwing righty was shipped to the Angels with 3 forgettable players for infielder Jim Fregosi, who was traded away in 1973.
You don't trade a young pitcher of that caliber, no matter how many young pitchers you have.
The day when he was traded from the Mets is rude, and there are 3 organizations who feel like they were blessed to have him.
A lot of people say, well, you know, Nolan Ryan couldn't pitch in New York, you know, and he couldn't take the pressures of the city. Those things had nothing to do with it.
Ryan remained a power pitcher well into his 40s. His flame ball and drop-off-the-table curve produced more strikeouts than anyone in history. He won 295 games with the Angels, Astros, and Rangers, giving him a total of 324 wins, and specialized in the no. That's 7.
Well, I think I only had one 20-game hitting streak in my life, and he stopped mine.
To throw 1 no-hitter is an astonishing thing. 2 is historic. To throw 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 no-hitters is almost beyond belief.
This may not be the worst trade of all time, but if it's not in the top 3 or 4, I don't know what is.
Slam dunk right at Bill Lambert's face.
The Warriors had Robert Parrish, who was a great player, but he was an outside center, a high post guy. They traded the 3rd pick, who turned out to be Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish to the Celtics for the number 1 pick, who turned out to be Joe Barry Carroll, because they wanted that big inside center.
Basically what you're saying is, we got Joe Barry Carroll. You got 2 Hall of Fame big men, Parrish and McHale. That's wrong. That's just flat out wrong.
After Celtics president Red Auerbach generated this 1980 deal, Boston dominated the East in the 80s and won 3 NBA championships. McHale was a 7-time All-Star. Parrish, a 9-time All-Star, and named one of the 50 greatest players in league history.
I was happy about the trade when I came to the Celtics from the Golden State Warriors. I had to tip my hat to Red. Another smart move, getting me here.
Red Auerbach is a genius. For those people who may not have caught his act in the 60s, this was that perfect little thing to remind folks just how shrewd a businessman he is.
It's the old cliche. He's playing chess, they're playing checkers.
4.
The Herschel Walker trade ranks as one of the most stunning in NFL history.
And it turned out it was a catastrophic trade. I gotta believe that Jimmy Johnson, you know, till this day, is laughing somewhere.
4.
In October of 1989, believing his team was only a running back away from a title, Vikings GM Mike Lynn pried Herschel Walker away from the Cowboys. The cost was horrendous. 5 players plus 6 draft picks. Walker never did get Minnesota to the Super Bowl, and Dallas, they built a dynasty.
The only thing Mike Lynn didn't understand was that Jimmy, before he ever made the trade, knew he was getting all the players and all the picks.
The multiple picks
gave us a mentality of risk-taking that we would not have had we had the normal picks to work with.
It seemed like an okay idea at the time, and then you look back and you're like, oh my God, what were they thinking? That's the worst trade, you know, how could they do that?
Walker played 42 games for the Vikings, and in his best of 3 seasons there, managed only 825 rushing yards. What the Cowboys received became the foundation for 3 Super Bowl championship teams. To replace Walker, they drafted some guy named Emmitt Smith, who only became the greatest ground gainer in the history of the NFL.
The fact that they got Kevin Smith and Emmitt Smith and Russell Maryland and Darren Woodson as an offshoot of those picks made this the team of the 90s.
They made the Dallas Cowboys and the world champions by giving up basically a whole draft.
Jimmy was a good football coach, great personnel guy.
I ended up with money, they ended up with Super Bowl rings, so you decide, what do you want worse, Super Bowl ring or money?
3.
Atlanta has selected Brett Favre, quarterback, Southern Mississippi.
Brett Favre was a nobody with a funny name. That year in Atlanta, no one called my name. No one cared. You know, guys would pass right by me, you know, who was that guy?
3.
As a rookie with Atlanta in 1991, Brett Favre played 2 games, threw 4 passes, completed none, had 2 picked off. Coach Jerry Glanville couldn't wait to dump the young quarterback out of Southern Miss. The Packers couldn't wait to pick him up. A bargain in exchange for the 17th pick in the '92 draft.
He was rotting on the bench over there in Atlanta and going nowhere fast. And we traded a #1 pick for this Brett Favre guy.
No one knew, including myself, what was to come.
Favre gunning it to the goal line and caught by Chamorro. Brooks, caught by Mays, touchdown.
Favre became the only 3-time MVP in league history, the NFL record holder for career completions, and has started more consecutive games than any quarterback ever. As for the Falcons, they spent their pick on running back Tony Smith, who played 3 generic seasons.
Tony didn't have a lot of courage, and he really wasn't that talented. Kind of one of those look like Tarzan, play like Jane kind of guys who didn't like a whole lot of contact.
Smith, he got in behind Hinton, but couldn't spring loose.
I didn't know where Green Bay was, but I knew it was up north, and I knew it was cold, but I knew about the history and tradition. And I said, hey, this is a great opportunity for me.
Two.
The newest Laker, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Hope I can live up to the build-up. I think I can. I'd like to try, and it's nice to be here.
Kareem kind of redefined in Los Angeles how dominant you can be.
In his first 5 NBA seasons, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar won 3 MVP awards and a championship. But he wanted out of Milwaukee anyway. A year later, in 1975, Bucks GM Wayne Embry sent him to L.A. for Dave Myers, Elmore Smith, Brian Winters, and Junior Bridgman. Not Manhattan for a handful of beads, but close.
It was time for me to leave. I don't think that the Bucks had it together to put together another great team like they did, and they kind of felt it was time to let me go. So it worked out for everybody.
We're going to lose him as a free agent, so we had to do something. As a result, we had the best deal with the Lakers, so we ended up dealing him to L.A.
In 1979, the Lakers drafted Magic Johnson, and the veteran center and the rookie point guard teamed to form Showtime. Abdul-Jabbar and his skyhook would score more points than anyone in NBA history and collect 5 more rings.
That also launched a Laker dynasty. And, my God, you ended up having Kareem and Magic together.
Swing left, right hand, 12-footer, good!
There's only one Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And so that trade, at the time it happened, I kind of questioned the players coming back in that deal.
The Lakers certainly got a lot better of the deal.
Welcome back to Who's Number One and the greatest trade robberies of all time. Here's 20-2.
20.
Dominic Hasek to Sabres.
19.
Ryne Sandberg to Cubs.
18.
Phil Esposito to Bruins.
17.
Pedro Martinez to the Expos.
16.
Jeff Bagwell to the Astros.
15.
Fergie Jenkins to the Cubs.
14.
Lou Brock to the Cardinals.
13.
A draft pick for Jerry Rice.
12.
Steve Carlton to Phillies.
11.
Frank Robinson to Orioles.
10.
Christy Mathewson to Giants.
9.
Kobe to the Lakers.
8.
Dennis Eckersley to the A's.
7.
Wilt Chamberlain to the 76ers.
6.
Nolan Ryan to the Angels.
5.
Robert Parrish to the Celtics.
4.
Herschel Walker to the Vikings.
3.
Brett Favre to Green Bay.
2.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the Lakers. You know, there are no mulligans or do-overs in trading. All transactions, like sales, are final. But if there was a mulligan, there's one franchise that would leap to the front of the line for a chance at redemption. And here it is.
1. 1.
Bill Russell wore that Celtic green and helped that team dominate the league. You talk about highway robbery.
When I was working for Time and Sports Illustrated, we constantly sent memos back to New York saying you should think of putting this guy from San Francisco on the cover. And they'd come back and say, yeah, but we got the box score last night, he got 6 points. And we'd say, yeah, but did you notice the other team only got 42?
In 1956, the Celtics coach and GM, the wily Red Auerbach, believed he needed a defender and a rebounder to make his high-octane team complete. He wanted Bill Russell, whom the St. Louis Hawks took with the second pick of the draft. The price was steep. 6-time All-Star Ed Macaulay and the rights to All-American Cliff Hagan. It turned out to be a steal.
Historically, you go, what a terrible deal. But he gets Ed Macaulay, he gets Cliff Hagan, and he gets the '58 NBA title. The trade-off doesn't look so good in the history books because St. Louis has a page. The Celtics have volumes and volumes and volumes. They have a dynasty.
The Boston Celtics are once again the world champions.
Russell was a 5-time MVP and averaged 22 boards a game. He was the ultimate team player, snuffing shots and igniting fast breaks.
Let's say you had a choice of me rebounding or Russell rebounding and starting the fast break. I don't think there would be any doubt. I would even want Russell.
He lays it up as blocked by Russell.
He made shot blocking an art and proved that quickness and finesse and brains was a match for brawn.
Underneath, Russell steals the ball.
His last two at San Francisco, they won the NCAA title twice. He went to the Olympics and won the gold medal. Then he came to Boston and played 13 years in the NBA, and they won 11 championships. So in 15 years at the top of the basketball world, he had 13 championships and a gold medal. Jordan and nobody else has done that.
He wins. He's a winner.
So ESPN Classic has rated the robbers and the victims, and now it's time to rate the ratings while hoping our ratings continue to soar. For that, we bring in our second guessers, the Junkies. You know them by now, for sports-loving radio talk show hosts from D.C. and Baltimore. Gentlemen.
All right, boys, let's talk about the all-time great trade robberies. What jumps out at you on the list here?
Well, first of all, that Red Auerbach's involved in about half of these moves.
It was genius.
Yeah.
And the number one, you can't argue with it. Bill Russell goes to the Celtics, 11 titles in 13 years.
Well, pretty smart for the St. Louis Hawks to trade away a guy who averaged
22 rebounds per game in his NBA career. To be fair, the Hawks won a championship with Ed McCauley. Right. But when you weigh the all-time NBA greats,
Let me see.
I don't think Ed McCauley's here.
Right.
It's more like Bill Russell here.
Right.
Ed McCauley forgot.
How about one championship to 11?
Ed McCauley short-term, Bill Russell long-term.
How about Scottie Pippen going to the Bulls, 1987, drafted by the Seattle Supersonics, 5th overall behind David Robinson, Gilliam, Dennis Hobson, and Reggie Williams. All right? They traded him for the rights to Olden Polynice. Right. Okay, so Scottie Pippen goes on to score, 20,000 points, 6 championships, one of the all-time great defensive players. And Olden Polynice goes over to Utah, end of his career, and is impersonating cops.
Right. I think the Bulls
I think that's a robbery.
Bulls got the better of that deal, I would say. Another omission, Marshall Faulk getting dealt from the Indianapolis Colts to the St. Louis Rams for a 2nd rounder and a 5th rounder because the Colts wanted to draft Edgerrin James. Kind of worked out for the Rams. All Marshall Faulk did when he went there, 3 straight seasons, his first 3 seasons there, over 2,000 all-purpose yards, 59 touchdowns, led them to 2 Super Bowls, winning 1. I think it worked out for the Rams. The Wizards traded away Ben Wallace for big fat Ike Austin. Right. Ben Wallace goes to Detroit. How about 4 times Defensive Player of the Year? How about he's the cornerstone of one of the best teams in the past 5 or 6 years in the NBA? Pedro Martinez shows up on this list at number 17. The Dodgers traded him years ago for Delino DeShields, a little toothpick second baseman, slappy hitter, because they thought Pedro was too skinny to be an all-star pitcher.
So they traded toothpick for toothpick.
Right. But how about Hall of Fame pitcher?
Yeah, well, that's what we call a botch, because he's one of the all-time great pitchers.
Another great baseball trade that's actually not on this list is when the White Sox traded Sammy Sosa to the Cubs for George Bell. Sammy Sosa went on to have over 500 home runs with the Cubs. George Bell hit 45, played 3 years, cooked.
Right, and had a bad Jerry curl to boot.
Right.
All right, boys, that's our list of the great trade robberies of all time.
Now that the second guessers have had their say, it's time to see how you, the fan, voted on Sports Nation on ESPN.com for the biggest trade robberies of all time. Number 5, Herschel Walker to the Vikings. Number 4, Kobe Bryant to the Lakers. Number 3, a draft pick for Jerry Rice. Number 2, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the Lakers. Number 1, Brett Favre to the Packers. So that's it for this edition of Who's Number 1. I'm Trey Wingo, and thanks for joining us for ESPN Classic's ranking of the 20 greatest trade robberies of all time. We will be back to continue our countdown of the teams, the athletes, and the events that have shaped our sports world. Until then, let the debating begin.